Hello, welcome to a brand new episode of Germany in Focus, a podcast made possible by members of The Local. Today we're getting into all the Euro 2024 action, what's been happening across Germany, and our highlights so far. We're explaining why the German coalition government is hanging by a thread and the calls for an earlier election. The German parliament has just passed a reform of the postal system. We're talking about how that will affect you. And Germany's new citizenship law comes into force next week. So we are talking about the long journey of this reform and how local authorities are preparing. Lastly, we'll share a few German words and phrases to help you celebrate the Euros. I'm Rachel Loxton, and I'm in Berlin today with journalists Imogen Goodman and Sarah Magill. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Rachel.
How are you?
I'm great, thanks. It's great to be here with Sarah for the first time.
Oh my God,
yes.
This
is the first time I've ever recorded with Sarah, so this is really exciting.
It is a historic moment.
It is.
Well, I'm very happy that you're both together. And Sarah, how have you been? Because we haven't seen you for a wee while.
Yeah, I've been really good, thanks. I'm really happy to be back with you guys, back in the booth. It's nice apart from the horrible weather outside, but it's great to be back.
Yes.
Great. Okay, shall we get into it then?
Yes.
The UEFA Euro 2024 tournament is well underway, and so far it's brought amazing scenes of fans taking over German cities with lots of dancing, singing, and bagpipes. We've seen a bit of transport problems. We've heard about British media taking things out of context, and we've even seen some great football as well. So the event started on Friday night, where Germany absolutely battered Scotland. They won 5-1. I gotta say, it was well deserved. Scotland were not on their best form. Germany were playing some beautiful football, to be honest. But in my opinion, Scottish fans have won the tournament so far because they're just so happy to be there. And I've loved seeing the videos of Scottish supporters just having a laugh with German fans in Munich and now Cologne before the game, because we're recording this on the Wednesday. So they're just there to have a good time. So what have you guys thought about the fans so far?
Well, from what I've seen, people have been pretty well behaved and in good spirits. I went to the Croatia-Spain game at the Olympiastadion in Berlin here on Saturday, and I was in a packed carriage full of Croatian and Spanish fans, and the mood was pretty light-hearted. There were a few little jibes here and there, but it was all in good spirits, and I just get the feeling people are here to enjoy the spectacle.
Yeah, definitely. I think the atmosphere has been really, really good. And most of the fans have just been having some good humoured banter with each other. Obviously, it was quite funny seeing drunken men in blue kilts taking over Marienplatz in Munich ahead of Scotland-Germany game, not to mention the guy who flashed the world on live TV.
Yes, I mean, you would know not to look under the kilt of a Scottish man.
Exactly. Well, now we definitely do. I did see some pretty hairy videos of Georgia and Turkey fans kind of going at each other, fighting on Tuesday in the stadium. But that does seem to be the exception. Most of the fans I've seen have just been fans from different nations having a laugh. There was actually a really great one going around of Austria fans breaking a baguette in front of the French before their head-to-head on Monday. That was brilliant. Of course, England fans have a slightly unique reputation abroad, let's say. And I was quite amused to see that they actually limited the drinks on offer at Gelsenkirchen Stadium to 2% beer only. To be honest, I do actually think that shows that the Germans don't understand us at all. We take that kind of thing as a challenge.
Absolutely. And did you guys see the Dutch fans as well in Hamburg? They were doing their little dance.
I did not see that.
Sea of orange.
That's hilarious.
It was amazing.
That's wonderful. They probably feel quite at home in Hamburg, actually. It's another sort of seafaring part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So after England's first match with Serbia, there were reports of really bad travel problems. A lot of people were reportedly stranded after the match in Gelsenkirchen. Do you guys think Germany's transport system can cope with this kind of event?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Definitely the situation in Gelsenkirchen was really a massive oversight. Apparently, they only had trams running every 15 minutes for a 60,000 capacity stadium, and people were waiting on this S-Bahn platform for hours after the match ended, more than 3 hours I've heard in some cases. That said, I honestly haven't heard of too many other issues so far. And I do think it's been pretty good that they've tried to make this tournament a little less harmful to the climate by offering, for instance, special Deutsche Bahn tickets for Euros fans and limiting parking spots at stadiums so people do take public transport. I'm not really a betting person, but I would wager that a lot of people will come away from Germany with quite a good impression of our public transport on balance. It's easy to take it for granted. It's easier to complain about Deutsche Bahn, but I'd say connections in German cities do tend to be pretty solid, pretty reliable.
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest, I don't see why the transport system shouldn't be able to cope with these huge numbers of fans, because it's just a matter of good organisation. And I think what happened on Sunday was probably the exception, because, you know, these stadiums are visited by large numbers of fans throughout the football season. So it's nothing entirely new in these areas. I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by how well the S-Bahn service was running in Berlin on Saturday. There were trains at least every 10 minutes, and there were police marshalling the doorways to make sure that the train carriages weren't overcrowded. So yeah, it was surprisingly well organised for Berlin.
Yeah, I agree. Did you also see that story in the British tabloid The Sun about Gelsenkirchen police apparently advising fans to smoke cannabis instead of drinking alcohol? We actually got in touch with the police and they said that they were misquoted.
Yeah, well, it seems that the quote from the spokesman for the Gelsenkirchen police was taken a bit out of context. What he was quoted as saying was that it's not a problem for fans to smoke cannabis on the street, and if the police were to see a group of people drinking alcohol and looking aggressive and another group were smoking cannabis, they would keep an eye on the drunk fans and not the fans smoking cannabis. But it wasn't like he said, you know, smoke weed instead of drinking alcohol. But some could argue that wouldn't be such a bad approach. And now that cannabis is legal in Germany, you know, it means that football fans can freely smoke a joint if they want. So it's arguably one of the bonuses of the Euros being held in Germany.
That is true, but they're not allowed to smoke it in the stadiums or in the fan zones or anything. The police were keen to point that out because there are a lot of families at this event.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so like on the street it's fine, but not near children.
Just beforehand to make sure that you take any sort of loss for your team in good spirits, or at least very relaxed spirits.
Yeah, exactly. So what else are you looking forward to in the rest of the tournament?
Well, it will have been and gone by the time this podcast comes out on Friday. But personally, I'm hoping we'll get away fast enough out of the podcast booth today for me to find a beer garden or a pub to watch the Germany-Hungary match in. There are some other really good matches coming up in the group stages. Obviously, all the England matches are going to be fantastic. But I reckon France versus the Netherlands is going to be really exciting as well this Friday. Two good teams. But things do always get a lot more interesting in the later rounds of the tournament, final 16, quarterfinals, semi-finals. And I'm personally really hoping for a Germany-England final.
Go Germany.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yes, we know which side you'll be on, Rachel.
Yeah, and just to balance out, because I am in the podcast booth with two English people, I did play them the Scottish national anthem before we started recording. That's how we will start every podcast from now on.
We actually both have Flower of Scotland in our heads now. We all have Flower of Scotland ringing in our ears as we're doing this podcast.
Yeah, it's a very moving football song. There's nothing to do with football, but yeah, it's great.
I'm glad you feel that way. I love it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking forward to just hanging out outside Spätis in Berlin, watching more matches. I've got 3 teams to support as my future husband is Italian-Croatian. So if England go out, I can cheer for Italy or Croatia instead. I have to say, despite having a German passport, I somehow still can't bring myself to support Germany. I just don't think I could deal with the smugness if Germany win.
That's really strange. I've always supported Germany as my plan B, even as an England supporter. So strange.
I can't explain it.
Identity aspects that come out.
It's true. I only learn my true identity through the football.
As we all do. As is only right.
Exactly. And I just remind myself that my personality is being Scottish. And I can just like go full force during a time like this with all these Scottish fans in Germany. It's like, yay. Okay, thank you so much for those updates, guys. It's been a shocking couple of weeks for European politics. We had the European parliamentary elections on June the 9th, and the day after, French President Emmanuel Macron called a snap election because of his party's defeat and the success of the far right in France. I'd recommend listening to our sister podcast, Talking France, and checking out the local France's brilliant coverage for that. Meanwhile, here in Germany, the coalition government made up of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats seems to be hanging by a thread. They've already been bickering even more than usual in the last months, but now they're also dealing with the dismal results their parties received at the European elections. Imogen, can you tell us, first of all, what were the headline results of the European elections in Germany that are important to know about?
Well, the most important thing to know is that the coalition government, so that's the Social Democrats or SPD, Greens and the Free Democrats or FDP, took an absolute drubbing. The SPD actually received their worst results ever in national elections and picked up just 13.9% of the vote, which is astoundingly low for a party that's traditionally been one of the big two. Things were actually even worse for the Greens, if you can imagine that. They got over 20% back in 2019, but this time around they saw their vote share drop to just 11.9%, so absolutely dismal. The FDP also dropped slightly from 5.4% last time to 5.2% this time. Altogether, the parties in this traffic light coalition lost a total of 21 points. So in contrast, the big winners were the CDU and the CSU centre-right parties and the far-right AfD. So this CDU-CSU alliance won a really convincing victory with 30% of the vote, while the AfD managed to increase their vote share from 11% in 2019 to 15.9% this time around. And that actually put them in second place overall in the country. Interestingly, there was a map of these winning parties across Germany that was going around on social media after the EU election results were announced. And that really shows just how strongly things have lurched to the right. In Western Germany, you had this big wall of black. The CDU were landing in first place in most of the rural areas, at least, while in Eastern Germany, it was the AfD in first place. Smaller parties, we had the left-wing Linke Party, who ended up just scoring 2.7% in the election. And then there's the newly founded outfit of Linke Defekte Sarah Wagenknecht, which is known as the Bundes Sarah Wagenknecht, or BSW. That managed to do a little bit better on 6.2%.
Interesting. So even though the far right dropped a little bit of support in Germany, as we were talking about in our most recent podcast, they were still a success story, really. So what does this mean for foreigners in Germany?
One thing this really shows is just how resilient the AfD are as a political force and just how mainstream these ideas are becoming. So in spite of the endless scandals we've talked about on this podcast and that the party has seen over the past 6 months, there's still a strong core of voters who really don't seem to care about AfD politicians using Nazi slogans or potentially even spying for China. Obviously, foreigners in Germany can feel a little bit comforted by the fact that the AfD are unlikely to ever be able to get the absolute majority they would need to govern in Germany. And as it stands, none of the other mainstream parties have said they are willing to work with them in a coalition, for example. That said, the concern is really that these ideas, their ideas and ideologies are becoming increasingly normalised and already influencing the discourse in the other parties and in society as a whole. So one big example of this would be in the debate over migration, things like deportations and also about German identity. So the tone around migration seems to have become increasingly hostile lately. We've seen a lot of discussion also in the CDU lately around this concept of Leitkultur, which is all about foreigners fitting in with the dominant culture rather than keeping their own culture and beliefs. One thing that's quite interesting is that the CDU didn't actually benefit a huge amount from the unpopularity of the governing parties in the EU elections in terms of stealing votes from them, while the AfD actually did. They made a lot of gains from almost all the parties on offer. So leaders in the CDU and CSU may well conclude that they need a further shift to the right in order to benefit politically. Of course, experience actually shows that this tactic usually only benefits the far right by pushing their ideas into the mainstream. But we may start to see more hardline kind of opinions coming out from them on things like migration.
Right. So let's look at the coalition government, because the parties, as you mentioned, got terrible results in the EU vote. But Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said that he has no plans to call an earlier election like in France. As things stand, the next federal election in Germany is due to take place over a year away in autumn 2025. But the election results are not the only thing rocking this trio, right?
No, that's right. As if the battering in the EU elections wasn't enough, the government is now hurtling towards their deadline for finalising a draft of the 2025 federal budget.
Oh, this budget.
Yeah, the budget. I
problems.
thought we just had that crisis 6 months ago. What are they doing? So the deadline actually to look out for this time around is July 3rd. But most analysis that I've read kind of suggests that negotiations are going to end up coming really close to the wire, assuming they even manage to meet the deadline, which is also, it's not impossible that they miss it. Let's put it that way. The talks between Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Finance Minister Christian Lindner, and Economics Minister Robert Habeck have been held behind closed doors so far. But what we do know is that the government is dealing with a lot less money than they thought they'd have. So we don't know how much exactly this is, but estimates put the number at between 25 and 50 billion euros. So that's a lot of money to find. This issue obviously is dredging up some pretty deep-rooted issues between the parties in the coalition. So the economically liberal FDP, who control the finance ministry, are saying they don't want to increase borrowing or raise taxes under any circumstances, while the centre-left Greens and SPD are ruling out cuts to social security and also to climate protection policies. So you may think, okay, the dire election results might be an incentive for the parties to hold together and try and sort of find a compromise. But it actually seems to be having the opposite effect. Each of the parties seem to have become much more entrenched in their viewpoints since the EU elections. So Scholz has generally been trying to keep the peace by taking the side of the FDP in these debates. But he's now coming under pressure from his own party, who are demanding more of the SPD and more social democracy in the coalition.
Do you guys think that this traffic light coalition can survive?
In my opinion, no. I think they've had a really rocky ride already over the last 3 years, and the pandemic and the war in Ukraine have just deepened the fractures, and I think we will definitely see a change of government and probably move to the right next year.
Yeah, it's a really great question and obviously a hard one to answer, because breaking up the coalition would be disastrous for all of the parties involved. No one thinks otherwise. But at the same time, it's hard to see how they can resolve these differences. I think the one thing maybe also holding them together is that it's very difficult in Germany to actually dissolve a government and force an early election. There's so many sort of hurdles to clear before you can do that. So that's also another reason they might try and find some sort of compromise. That said, I recently found out that during the last budget crisis, Scholz actually sought advice about breaking up the coalition and potentially forming a minority government with support from the CDU, which apparently the CDU were kind of open to. So he did that in secret the last time. This time around, it's possible that the Greens and SPD could choose to break away by themselves. But, it's clear that would make things really difficult for them, particularly when it comes to getting any legislation at all through Parliament.
Yeah, absolutely. And they'll also be watching what happens in the state elections in 3 eastern states coming up this September, where the AfD is expected to do exceptionally well.
Definitely.
So there's another problem for them. But we think if they hold on somehow until the next federal election, it looks like, as the polls show, they'll definitely be out at that point.
Yeah, we shall see. I mean, it also depends. It also depends how many foreigners take German citizenship. That could also shift. Maybe won't shift things entirely, but who knows what impact that will have.
Absolutely. Let's wait and see what happens. Thank you for those updates. We're moving on to post now, an important everyday thing. The German Parliament has passed a reform of the Postal Act. Now, I don't know about you both, but I have had terrible experiences with post in Germany. things haven't arrived or have taken weeks when they should take a few days. I've sent cards with the right stamps that haven't made it to Scotland. I've been wrongly told to pay customs fees. That wasn't actually Deutsche Post, but still. It all adds to the very horrible experience that this part of living in Germany has had for me. Sarah, I would love to know, are things going to get better when it comes to post in Germany under this reform?
Well, Rachel, from your perspective, things are going to get worse because the big change coming in is that Deutsche Post's delivery targets are being relaxed. So right now, Deutsche Post has to deliver at least 80% of its letters by the next working day and 95% within 2 days. But following this reform, the new target will be for 95% of letters to reach their recipients within 3 working days and 99% within 4 working days. So in other words, the postal service is going to get a lot slower. And if you need a letter to arrive sooner, you'll have to pay extra for priority delivery.
Why are these law changes happening then? Because it seems that things should only be getting better.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea is that since letters aren't the primary way we communicate anymore, well, at least in theory, though I have the feeling that Germany still communicates a lot by letter. Yeah, the argument is there's less need for letters to be delivered to such urgent deadlines. And the current postal requirements were laid out in 1997 when the internet was just starting out and most communication was done through letters. So obviously things have changed a lot since then with email and instant messaging taking over. But on the other hand, online shopping is booming now, which means that far more parcels are being shipped. So the new law also plans to set up more post office branches nationwide, including kiosks in shops, especially in smaller towns and villages. And it also includes new rules to protect postal workers, such as handling heavy parcels and tighter regulations for subcontractors.
So I've talked about my experience of post in Germany, but what is the feeling generally, Sarah? Is the postal service any good in Germany compared to the rest of the world?
Well, it might surprise you to learn, Rachel, that according to the latest postal development report from the Universal Postal Union, Germany has the 3rd most efficient postal service in the world. They did an annual assessment last year looking at the postal services of 172 countries and ranked them on things like reliability, reach and resilience, basically how well they can handle crises like the COVID-19 pandemic and economic downturns. Switzerland came out on top for the 6th year in a row with a perfect score of 100. Austria was in 2nd place and Germany wasn't far behind with a score of 95.7%.
So maybe Germany is efficient after all, in theory at least.
Maybe. I find it hard to believe, but, the statistics speak for themselves. Can't argue with them.
What's your experience of post here?
One thing I fell foul of last year was when I was sending out wedding invitations. We printed them out in a 14 centimetre by 14 centimetre format, which is like a standard birthday card size. And then we realised that these technically qualified as large size post, which is anything wider than 12.5 centimetres. I think that changed last year. So this meant that we had to pay €3.70 to post every card which we sent outside of Germany instead of €1.10 if it was a smaller one. So that turned out to be a pretty expensive miscalculation and definitely a warning. Like if you're planning to send cards en masse, make sure they're maximum 12.5 centimetres wide.
Yeah, and continually check the rules, I guess, if they change quite often. Okay, thanks for that, Sarah. We really have been waiting a long time for this, but next week on June 27th, the new citizenship law that will allow everyone naturalising as German to hold multiple nationalities, as long as their origin country allows it, will come into force. So under this law, it also reduces the required residency period needed for people to apply from 8 to 5 years for the standard route and even to 3 years on the fast-track route. Imogen, it's been a bit of a rough journey, hasn't it? But it's almost here.
Yes, yeah, it's been a rocky road. We've seen the blockades, we've seen the quibbling. Obviously, the quibbling is par for the course in the coalition, but there's been a lot of quibbling over this. There have been some delightfully furious speeches from the opposition, from the CDU and AfD in the Bundestag, but none of that has managed to stop this bill from finally becoming a reality. And we couldn't be more excited about it, or I couldn't anyway. So on a personal note for me, actually the first ever article that I wrote for The Local was an op-ed on dual nationality way back in 2020. And I remember back then it seemed absolutely impossible that this rule would ever be changed in Germany, and it seemed hopeless that you could ever keep your old passport and become German. And now, of course, we're just days away from seeing this law come into force. And I really think it's just a huge reason to celebrate for so many foreigners in Germany.
Absolutely. So we have obviously talked about this so much, both on the Germany in Focus podcast and on the Local Germany site. Anyone listening should definitely check out all our articles by our brilliant team, which are under the tag German Citizenship. And we'll make sure to share a few articles in the show notes as well. But there are still a lot of worries. We've talked about waiting times recently in different German cities. And now I'm wondering, Imogen, how are local authorities preparing for this?
Yeah, this is one thing that's been dampening the mood a little bit. We're all kind of asking ourselves, how are these creaking public authorities with their fax machines and sort of paper-based systems actually going to be able to deal with the massive applications that everyone's expecting after June 27th? So I did actually put some inquiries out to different naturalisation offices around the country, and it seems like they are preparing for the new law already, which is good news. They're not just sticking their heads in the sand. And mostly they've done this by increasing their staff numbers and just trying to make their processes as efficient as possible. We even heard the D word, digitalization. So Berlin and Hamburg have recently made the switch to a digital system with online applications, online pre-screening, so you don't have to wait for this call. And in Leipzig, it's good news. They say they're working on it and people will soon be able to apply online. So in Cologne, we've recently reported that they've had to stop accepting applications due to the huge size of the backlogs. But they say they want to triple their staff numbers from 30 to 90. So hopefully that should stand them in better stead when they reopen applications later this year. So in other places like Stuttgart and Munich, the authorities have been trying to hold plenty of information events as well and make sure their website is up to date with the latest info, just to make things a lot easier for foreigners and for people like lawyers and NGOs who support them.
Yeah, and we also got a late reply from Dusseldorf, didn't we? And they said they're taking on a few extra staff. They still have thousands of applications to get through, like most places. But they are also trying to tackle the situation as well.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really good news. Actually, the one thing I should probably mention is that Frankfurt appear to just be hoping that everything will be fine. They said they haven't taken on more staff. They don't have the budget for it. So apologies if you're in Frankfurt. You could be in for a pretty rocky ride.
Yeah, let's see. And the other thing I heard recently in Berlin is that it's really difficult to get an appointment for a citizenship test, apparently. Or, you have to kind of book or just turn up on the day or something like that?
I think you have to often turn up in person to actually book it with your passport. Yeah, those are booked up. I think if you are thinking of applying, all of that stuff is a really good idea to kind of get the ball rolling now, because who knows how many months it will take. Some people are kind of refreshing the Volkshochschule website as if it's like gig tickets to see the Beatles or something. It's pretty insane.
A really modern reference there.
I know. I don't know any bands. What year is it?
Before we end our episode today, we are going to hop back to the Euro 2024 theme and chat about the German words and phrases to know so you can really get into this football tournament like a local. So you might need these if you're out watching a match. Maybe you're making friends with Germans at a screening. This is the summer to be out and about and practicing your German, even though the weather has been crap. Sarah, do you have a couple of phrases that we should know?
Yeah, I've got a couple of interesting ones for you. Firstly, I think an important one for England fans is the German word for penalty kick, as England usually end up going out on penalties. In German, it's called an Elfmeter, which means literally 11 meters, because that's the distance from the penalty spot to the goal. So a nice practical German word there. And also it can be shortened to Elfer. If somebody gets tackled in the penalty box, you might hear German shouting Elfer, like, meaning give them a penalty. A fun one is Schwalbe, which is actually the German name for the swallow bird. But in footballing terminology, it means a dive. So when a player dramatically falls to try to get a free kick or a penalty, it's called that because often when players do that, when they collapse on the floor with their legs and arms splayed out, they look like a swallow with its forked tail. So it's actually a very poetic
It is.
German one. So yeah, that's a good one to know because otherwise it would be quite confusing to hear that being shouted in a pub.
Yeah, you're like, why are they talking about birds?
Yeah.
Imogen, what would you like to share?
Well, this is quite a basic one, but everyone should know that the word for goal in German is Tor, and that the word for goalie is a Torwart, not to be confused with Torsteher, which is the word for bouncer. So this is useful to know, actually, because if you want to support your team, for example, Germany, you can chant Deutschland vor, schieß ein Tor, which translates as go on Germany, score a goal. Funnily enough, I did hear a hilarious adaptation of this chant at the Scotland-Germany opening match from a guy who'd placed a bet on Germany to win 3-0. He was obviously a bit conflicted when the score was 3-0, but there was still quite a bit left of the match. So he opted for the chant, Bleib 3-0, no more goal, which I thought was a great example of football fans' creativity. He made that up on the spot, so that's another one. Stay 3-0, no more goal.
I love that. And you can also say, Ich bin für Schottland, Ich bin für Deutschland, if you want to say, I am supporting whatever team it is. I'm going to share another one that everyone should know, also because Scotland experienced this in the first game with Germany, and that is Arschkarte. So this is a red card when someone is sent off the pitch. So you can also say rote Karte, but Arschkarte is the slang word for it. It literally is arse card. I did think it was because you're being an arse if you get a red card, but I did some research on the origins, and apparently it dates back to the 1970s, at that time when it was quite hard to see the TV properly. And so referees were kind of advised on where they should have their cards. So they had the yellow card in the shirt pocket and their red card in the back pocket next to their arse.
That's a great bit of trivia.
I know. I was really excited to find that out. So Arschkarte. So when you hear that, they're not just like, oh, you're an arse. Or maybe they are.
It makes sense in both senses. I think both are very appropriate meanings to the word.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for those great tips for watching the Euros. And I hope everyone enjoys whatever matches they're watching later. That's it for this week. Thank you so much to all our listeners. As always, we will add the links in the show notes for the stories we've been talking about today. It would mean so much to us if you hit follow, left a rating or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This week's panelists have been Imogen Goodman and Sarah Magill, and our sound engineer is Rhys Edwards. I'm Rachel Loxton. We hope you enjoyed listening and see you next week. Until then, take care.